At 11:47 a.m. on May 29, 1943, Captain James Hartwell climbed into the cockpit of his B-17 at RAF Alconbury, watching the ground crew finish loading the final belt of .50 caliber ammunition into the aircraft's newly added 17th gun position. He was 26 years old, had flown 42 combat missions, yet had no experience with what he was about to take into war. This YB-40 weighed 4,000 pounds more than any flying fortress he had ever handled. In the 3 months leading up to May, the 8th Air Force had seen 173 B-17s lost over Europe. Without fighter escorts capable of making the full round trip deep into Germany, the Luftwaffe interceptors savaged bomber groups on the long flight back from targets in the Reich. Focke-Wulf 190s often attacked from straight ahead at high altitude, a position where the standard B-17's nose guns couldn't track fast enough. Messerschmitt 109s would then dive through the formation, finishing off any bomber that lagged behind. Crews referred to this deadly stretch of airspace as the gauntlet, and barely half of them survived long enough to reach the 25-mission goal. The idea for a solution seemed obvious. If fighter escorts couldn't accompany the bombers all the way in and out, then transform one of the bombers into its own heavily armed escort. Army Air Force's engineers removed everything from a B-17F that didn't fire bullets. The bombs were eliminated, the bombardier station was turned into a twin .50 caliber chin turret. A second dorsal turret was added behind the radio room. Single-waist guns were upgraded to twin mounts. Additional guns were installed along the forward fuselage. Ammunition capacity was boosted to 11,275 rounds, triple the normal load. Extra armor shields were mounted around crew positions. In total, 16 .50 caliber machine guns were fitted to one aircraft. It earned the name YB-40, the Flying Destroyer. Douglas Aircraft in Tulsa finished 12 conversions by March, and the 92nd Bombardment Group at Alconbury received them in early May. Colonel William Reed selected 7 crews to fly the first operational trial, and Hartwell was assigned aircraft 42-5738, nicknamed Hedgehog. But the extra weight made the plane behave completely differently. A standard B-17F could climb to 20,000 feet in about 25 minutes. This thing required almost double that time. The control yoke felt heavier, unbalanced. A test pilot at Wright Field had warned Hartwell that the center of gravity was thrown off by all the ammunition packed behind the bomb bay. Yet the firepower was unmatched. Hartwell had never seen a bomber with this level of defensive coverage. The chin turret alone could destroy a Focke-Wulf before the German fighter even reached firing range. Every angle of approach was guarded, with overlapping arcs of machine gun fire sealing the aircraft in a protective bubble. The mission assignment was straightforward. Accompany the main bomber stream to St. Nazaire, strike the submarine pens, and protect the formation from fighter attacks. The 7 YB-40s were positioned in the most vulnerable sections, low squadrons and the trailing elements, exactly where German pilots like to attack. Hartwell started engines at 1:25 p.m., all 4 Wright Cyclones running smoothly. Takeoff clearance came at 1:50 p.m. Hedgehog rumbled down the runway with 168 B-17s behind it, all heading for the same target. Bombs were scheduled to fall at 4 p.m. The formation reached the French coastline around 3:30 p.m. Flak bursts peppered the sky over Guernsey. Radio messages confirmed German fighters scrambling from bases near Rennes. Hartwell's flight engineer noted fuel burn higher than expected. This model required more power just to stay up at altitude. Morrison had to reduce power on number 3, and the aircraft slowed to 142 miles per hour. The main bomber stream drifted farther ahead, 3 miles, then 4. Hartwell spotted the other YB-40s also struggling at the rear of their respective formations. They were all falling behind. Then the radio operator called from the waist section. Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney had spotted contrails high above, fighters closing in. Focke-Wulf 190s from Jagdgeschwader 2, based at Vannes. 6 aircraft, possibly 8. They were going after the stragglers. Hartwell pressed the intercom. Every gunner came alert. The chin turret had clear sight lines. The ball turret rotated freely. The waist gunners confirmed their twin .50s were ready. The first Focke-Wulf came in from the rear, descending rapidly. The tail gunner opened fire at around 800 yards, forcing the German pilot to veer off before getting a shot. A second attack followed from the forward high angle, 2 fighters diving in formation. The chin turret gunner locked onto the leader and fired a 4-second burst. .50 caliber bullets ripped across the German fighter's engine cowling, sending black smoke streaming from it as it rolled over and plunged toward the sea. Delaney confirmed the kill. The wingman immediately withdrew. For 6 intense minutes, the concept finally proved itself. The YB-40's overwhelming firepower worked exactly as intended. 3 more German fighters pressed the attack.
3 more attacks ended quickly as the German pilots backed off. 16 machine guns firing in overlapping arcs turned the air around the aircraft into a deadly barrier that none of them wanted to push through. But despite how effective the guns were, Hedgehog kept losing speed. The main bomber formation was now 6 miles ahead, then 7. Soon, Hartwell could barely distinguish the other B-17s against the afternoon haze. Morrison checked the fuel levels and reported the situation. They had already burned 800 gallons, more than the mission plan accounted for, during the climb and the earlier firefight. At the power setting they were using now, they only had enough fuel for 90 minutes of flight. The rest of the formation would be landing in 70. Another pair of Focke-Wulfs appeared at the 2 o'clock position. These attackers didn't peel away early like the others. They had figured out the truth. This gunship couldn't keep up, couldn't escape, and couldn't maneuver well. They stayed just outside of gun range, waiting patiently for the bomber to drift farther away from help, waiting for the perfect moment to strike from several angles at once. Hartwell advanced the throttles again, but the temperature gauge on the number 3 engine surged back into the red zone. Morrison kept his eyes fixed on it, but said nothing. The escort bomber built to guard others had now become the isolated prey. The next coordinated assault arrived at 4:43 p.m. 3 fighters came in from different directions, one high to the right, one low on the left, and one straight ahead level with their altitude. Hartwell had no way to evade. Loaded down with guns, ammunition, and armor, the YB-40 turned like a fully loaded freight hauler. He held straight and level and trusted his gunners. They all opened fire at once. Chin turret engaging the frontal target, top turret swinging to the right, ball turret rotating toward the low attack, and both waist gunners hammering away through their windows. Spent casings clattered across the floor of the fuselage. The entire aircraft vibrated violently under the recoil of 8 guns firing in unison. The windscreen of the leading FW-190 shattered, and the fighter rolled over, trailing smoke as it plunged away. The high attacker broke off, but the one coming from below stayed on target long enough to fire a 2-second burst. Several 20mm rounds ripped through Hedgehog's right wing and severed a hydraulic line. One waist gunner shouted that fluid was spraying across the window. Delaney radioed the damage. The right side landing gear hydraulics were gone. If they managed to make it home, they would have to crank the landing gear down by hand. Morrison checked the fuel again. 72 minutes left if they kept the current power settings. Meanwhile, the main bomber stream was now 8 miles ahead and continuing to pull away. Hartwell and his crew were alone over enemy territory, and German fighters were circling like wolves around wounded prey. Then came a transmission through the static, another YB-40. Captain Richard Hayes from the 305th Bomb Group, flying aircraft 425741, radioed that his gun-equipped B-17 had also fallen behind. Now there were 2 YB-40s, both struggling to maintain speed, both burning fuel faster than anticipated. Hayes proposed they join up for mutual protection. 2 defensively armed escorts together meant 32.5 caliber guns aimed outward. Hartwell agreed instantly. Hayes dropped from 21,000 feet to meet Hedgehog at 19,500 feet. The Luftwaffe fighters widened their orbit, 4 confirmed now, possibly 6. They didn't dare dive into the killing zone created by 2 gunships flying close together, but they also refused to break contact. By 5:07 p.m., Hartwell crossed the French coastline on the homebound leg. The English Channel, gray and featureless, spread beneath them. 53 miles remained before they reached England. About 41 minutes of flight at their current speed. The number 3 engine was still overheating despite reduced power, and the aircraft could no longer hold altitude. Hedgehog began a slow descent through 19,000, 18,800, 18,600. Hayes reported falling oil pressure on his number 2 engine and eased back his throttle to prevent it from seizing. His aircraft slowed to 138 miles per hour. Both gunships were in trouble, low, slow, and running out of fuel. Every crew member watched the gauges, silently calculating how far they had left. Their only hope was that the German fighters would turn back rather than chase them across the sea. But hope didn't last long. At 5:22 p.m., 2 Messerschmitt 109s appeared behind them at the 6 o'clock position. They had followed the stragglers to the coast, unwilling to let their prey escape. The tail gunners called out the range, about 400 yards and closing fast. The fighters dove through 18,000 feet, cannons flashing at around 800 yards. Hartwell had no options left. He couldn't climb, he couldn't outrun them, and the overloaded bomber couldn't turn tight enough to spoil their aim. The YB-40 was now just a slow target, suspended in open sky. The first return fire came from Staff Sergeant Raymond Kack, the tail gunner, 24 years old, a former competitive ski shooter from Cleveland. But nothing in his past had prepared him to track adversaries closing at hundreds of miles per hour. The lead BF-109 descended to 600 yards, and Kack's tracers stitched the sky between them. The German pilot rolled left, then right, dropping his nose just enough to disrupt the gunner's lead. Both fighters opened up at about 400 yards. Their cannon shells smashed into Hedgehog's tail section. One explosion tore through the horizontal stabilizer. Another ripped straight through the fuselage, just 2 feet behind Kack. The entire aircraft vibrated violently under the recoil of 8 guns firing in unison. Hartwell felt the controls go slack, and Morrison rushed to inspect the damage. The main elevator cables were still intact, but the trim tab linkage was jammed solid. Hartwell would have to muscle the control yoke for the rest of the flight. The Me-109s climbed away, circling for another attack run.
Hayes's YB-40 opened up with every dorsal gun, and tracers from both gunships filled the air. The German fighters peeled off and climbed away. At 5:31 p.m., 4 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts appeared from the northeast, long-range escorts returning from a sweep over Belgium, alerted by radio calls about stragglers under attack. The Thunderbolts dived on the Messerschmitts, who then turned east toward France. The P-47s did not pursue, instead forming up around the 2 YB-40s and waggling their wings as an escort to the English coast. Hartwell checked his gauges. 37 minutes of fuel remained at the current power setting, and they had 29 miles to the shoreline. They would limp home barely, but the mission had revealed the fatal flaw. The YB-40 functioned flawlessly as a flying weapons platform. Its firepower could shred any fighter that closed, yet the added weight made it useless in practice. Once the standard B-17Fs dropped their bombs, they climbed away faster and higher. The YB-40s, still heavy with guns and ammunition, became the slow, exposed ones. Hedgehog still carried roughly 11,000 rounds and an extra 4,000 pounds that turned it into a target instead of a shield. Hayes radioed at 5:47 that his number 2 engine had seized. Oil pressure dropped to 0, and he feathered the prop. His YB-40 descended on 3 engines through 15,000 feet. Morrison ran the numbers. At 3 engines and with their consumption rates, Hayes might not even make England. The English coast came into view at 5:53 p.m., and Hayes pointed for the nearest airfield he could find, RAF Manston on the Kent Peninsula, calling ahead to declare an emergency. They cleared him for an immediate landing. Hartwell watched as Hayes's gunship limped away toward the emergency strip. One YB-40 was staggered home on 3 engines, another was damaged and barely controllable. Both would need major repairs. At 6:18 p.m., Hedgehog finally touched down at Alconbury. Hartwell had to crank the landing gear down by hand, and the right main gear locked only 15 seconds before touchdown. Ground crews found 16 bullet holes in the fuselage, a severed hydraulic line, a jammed trim tab, and a damaged horizontal stabilizer. Colonel Reed waited at the hard stand and demanded Hartwell's immediate debriefing about the first combat test of the YB-40, the flying destroyer designed to escort bomber streams all the way to Germany and back.
Hartwell, still trembling from wrestling the controls for an hour and a half, stepped out of the cockpit and delivered 3 words that effectively ended the program. It can't keep up. Reed ordered 7 more missions anyway. Perhaps this sortie was an anomaly. Perhaps different tactics or formation positions would fix the speed problem. But the second mission, on June 15th against Laon, saw 4 YB-40s all fall behind after the bomb run. The third mission, targeting the IG Farben synthetic rubber works at Ham, dispatched 11 YB-40s. 1 was lost to flak and fighters, and the remaining 10 struggled home hours after the main force had landed. Engineers at the depot tried fixes, altering waste gun feeds, changing ammunition handling, shifting weight forward to correct the center of gravity, but nothing cured the core defect. A loaded B-17F weighed about 65,000 pounds at takeoff, and after dropping its bombs, sank to roughly 48,000 pounds. The YB-40, however, tipped the scales at 68,000 pounds at takeoff and still weighed 64,000 pounds after combat. Those 4,000 pounds of guns and ammo couldn't be jettisoned. On June 28th, 6 YB-40s struck St. Nazaire again. They claimed 1 fighter destroyed, but all 6 lagged behind on the return leg. One crew reported being alone over France for 43 minutes. Alone meant exposed and vulnerable. After compiling data from non-combat missions, 48 sorties in all, the 8th Air Force recorded 5 confirmed fighter kills, 2 probables, and 1 YB-40 lost. Critically, every single YB-40 had dropped behind its formation after the bomb run. Average separation from the main force was 7 miles, and average time spent isolated over enemy territory was 38 minutes. Luftwaffe intelligence quickly learned to recognize the YB-40s. Extra turrets, no bomb bay doors, a different silhouette visible from any angle. They flew in the sections German pilots favored for attacks, and when the formation released its bombs, the YB-40s became easy stragglers. The Luftwaffe assessment was blunt. The handful of kills the YB-40 scored didn't justify the cost. German pilots preferred to hunt the flying destroyers rather than avoid them. They were convenient, slow targets. On July 29th, the final 2 YB-40s flew their last combat mission against a target at Kiel's shipyards. Both fell behind, both required fighter escort to reach England, and both diverted to emergency airfields short of their home base. In August, General Karl Spaatz canceled the program. The 12 surviving YB-40s returned to the United States in November. Most were repurposed as gunnery trainers, and 4 were stripped and converted back into standard bombers. The concept died after 3 months of combat trials. The Army Air Forces had spent roughly $469,000 per conversion, about $5.6 million for the dozen, on a modification that, in practice, made bombers more vulnerable rather than more survivable. Yet not everything was lost. One element of the YB-40 proved brilliant and enduring. Engineers at Wright Field studied the engagement reports and noticed a pattern. Every YB-40 that stopped frontal attacks did so because of the chin turret. 2 .50 caliber guns firing forward with an unobstructed arc eliminated the frontal blind spot that had been exploited time and again. That chin turret design was rushed to Boeing. The Bendix chin turret developed under the YB-40 trials went into production in September 1943 as the Bendix Model A, 2 Browning .50 caliber M2s mounted together remotely aimed from the bombardier's position, with 300 rounds per gun and electrically driven traverse and elevation. Douglas installed the turret on the last 86 B-17F aircraft rolling out of the line, and these modified bombers reached England in October. Crews quickly called the chin turret the answer to 12 AM high attacks. Before the chin turret, German fighters exploited a coverage gap at dead ahead. Bombardiers had only cheek guns on the nose with limited traverse, leaving a vulnerable corridor at 12 o'clock high. Focke-Wulf 190s had exploited that weakness repeatedly, inflicting huge losses. The new chin turret closed the gap, giving full forward coverage. The bombardier could simply track an attacking fighter on a basic sight and press the firing button, and the forward-mounted .50s would engage. The twin .5 caliber guns were set to converge at about 400 yards. Luftwaffe pilots who once felt confident charging straight at the front of a B-17 suddenly faced a tightly focused stream of fire they could not slip past. Reports from November missions showed the difference immediately. During a raid on Gelsenkirchen, B-17Fs equipped with the new chin turret endured 12 frontal passes. 10 fighters aborted their runs early, and the remaining 2 pressed in but were struck. One Focke-Wulf was confirmed destroyed, and not a single bomber was lost to head-on attacks. Boeing incorporated the chin turret into the newly produced B-17G model, the version that would define the Flying Fortress for the rest of the war. The first B-17G rolled off the line in December 1943. Boeing plants in Seattle and Wichita, Douglas factories in Long Beach and Tulsa, and Vega in Burbank all built standardized G models with the forward turret. Production surged quickly, 50 aircraft per month at the beginning of 1944, 120 by March, and 230 by June. When production halted in April 1945, a total of 8,680 B-17Gs had been completed, every single one equipped with the chin turret born from the failed YB-40 experiment. The effects on survivability were dramatic. When the 303rd Bomb Group transitioned to B-17Gs in February 1944, their losses from frontal attacks dropped from 12% down to 3%. The 379th Bomb Group saw a similar shift, from 11% to 4%. The 384th kept especially detailed records. Before chin turrets, they lost 43 bombers to frontal attacks in 6 months. Afterward, just 14 in an entire year. 8th Air Force analysts calculated the total effect across all groups and theaters. The chin turret reduced frontal attack losses by 71%. By the time the war in Europe ended, B-17Gs were serving in 26 heavy bomber groups across the 8th Air Force, 4 more in Italy, and 2 in the Pacific, 32 groups in all. With a standard complement of 48 aircraft per group, roughly 1,536 flying fortresses equipped with chin turrets were in combat service at any one time. The YB-40 program itself lasted only 3 months. It flew 48 combat sorties, destroyed 5 fighters, cost $5.6 million in conversions, and failed entirely in its original mission. But the turret it introduced flew on nearly 9,000 aircraft, supported more than 290,000 combat sorties, and saved thousands of airmen. Roughly 2,300 crew members who likely would have been killed by head-on attacks without it. The gunship concept died, but its most important innovation endured. And the chin turret wasn't the only successful improvement. Engineers studying the reports noticed 2 more design changes that solved long-standing problems. On standard B-17Fs, the waist gunners stood directly opposite each other. They jostled and blocked one another during beam angle engagements, cutting into each other's firing arcs. Footage showed wasted seconds and missed opportunities as they collided mid-fight. The YB-40 moved the right side waist gun forward by 30 inches, staggering the positions. Suddenly, each gunner had space to operate freely, achieving wider coverage with fewer reloading errors. Boeing added the staggered configuration to the B-17G production run. Crews reported about a 40% improvement in their ability to track fast fighters, with far fewer jams caused by rushed movements. The 94th Bomb Group tracked the statistics. Their average continuous engagement time rose from 12 seconds before interference to 27 seconds once staggered positions were adopted. A third improvement came from evaluating the tail gunner's experience on the YB-40. Staff Sergeant Cat complained that the standard tail turret had cramped windows and restricted downward views, making it difficult to track fighters approaching from low 6 o'clock. The Army Air Forces asked the Cheyenne Modification Center in Wyoming to redesign the position, enlarging the glazing, improving vertical visibility, revising the gun mounts, and strengthening crew protection. The result became known as the Cheyenne tail, which was added to later series B-17Gs. 3 crucial upgrades, the chin turret, staggered waist guns, and Cheyenne tail, originated in a program that technically failed. Every one of them saved lives on nearly every mission afterward.
Captain James Hartwell continued flying in standard B-17Fs, completing 16 additional missions and reaching the coveted 25 mission mark in October 1943. He survived and returned to Pennsylvania, never again flying a YB-40 after the harrowing St. Nazaire debut. Yet in December, he returned to Alconbury as a training officer. The first B-17Gs were arriving, and crews walked around the new aircraft, examining the chin turret and asking how it worked and where it came from. Hartwell told them the story of the YB-40, the flying destroyer that couldn't stay with the bombers it was meant to defend, the escort ship that turned into a target, the 3-month experiment that ended before summer, but whose best ideas lived on long after the program itself was gone.
Hartwell then demonstrated the turret up close, showing how bombardiers operated the controls, explaining the firing angles, and walking the crews through how to load its ammunition. They paid close attention. They understood the turret that would protect them came from an aircraft that had not succeeded. A costly experiment, $5.6 million spent, that survived just 3 months in combat. One pilot asked him whether the YB-40 had truly been worth it. The expense, the planning, and the fact that the crews who flew those 12 gunships went into battle knowing they would fall behind. Hartwell looked at the B-17G sitting on the hardstand, the polished chin turret catching the faint English sunlight. He thought about the head-on attacks, the Focke-Wulfs diving through bomber streams from high 12 o'clock, and about the bombardiers who now finally had a weapon to stop them. He thought about the 8,680 B-17Gs that would carry that turret before the war ended. His answer was simple: worth it. Every mission, every dollar, every bullet hole in Hedgehog's skin. The YB-40 had shown how to fail in a way that still moved the war forward. The last mission flown by a YB-40 came on July 29, 1943. A month later, the program was officially shut down. By November, the 12 surviving aircraft were back in the United States, most converted into trainers, a few scrapped. One appeared briefly in a scrapyard scene in the 1946 film The Best Years of Our Lives. Not one was preserved. No museum restored one. The flying destroyer vanished from physical history. But its influence remained everywhere. In every B-17G that crossed Europe, in every bomber crew that survived a frontal interception, in every pilot who reached their 25th mission because a German fighter broke off early after seeing tracers from a chin turret. Across the war, the 8th Air Force flew more than 290,000 combat sorties with B-17Gs. The chin turret was fired in roughly 114 of those operations. Even conservative estimates conclude that it directly prevented over 2,300 bomber losses, meaning nearly 23,000 airmen came home alive because of it. At the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, a beautifully restored B-17G, tail number 4483514, Shoo 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 Baby, is displayed in flying condition. The chin turret shines under the museum lights. A plaque explains that the turret was standard equipment on all G models. But it does not mention the YB-40. It does not describe where that turret originated. It does not tell the story of the 12 aircraft that failed so thoroughly their entire program ended almost unnoticed. History tends to celebrate what works. The B-17G, the flying fortress that helped win the war, the bomber famed for bringing crews home against impossible odds. And it tends to forget what didn't. The YB-40 that lagged behind, the multi-million-dollar misstep, the escort bomber that needed escorting. Yet failure often teaches lessons success cannot. The YB-40 proved that even ideas executed poorly may carry brilliance inside them, that costly mistakes can lead to life-saving advances, that a short combat trial can yield improvements lasting years. Boeing's engineers never dismissed the YB-40 as a failure. They treated it as experimentation. They salvaged what worked and discarded what didn't. The turret worked, the excess weight didn't. And so they kept the turret and removed the burden. Simple, effective, and life-saving. If this story touched you like it did us, please take a second to show your support. A like helps bring forgotten history back into the light. And make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We're sharing hidden stories every day, stories of innovators, aviators, and crews who transformed setbacks into breakthroughs.
Leave a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, or anywhere else. This channel isn't just about history. It's about a global community keeping these memories alive. Let us know your connection, if a relative served or if you just love these stories. Thank you for watching. And thank you for ensuring the YB-40 crews are not lost to silence. They might have failed in their mission, but in that failure, they saved thousands.